So, what am I asking you to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to read the handout that is attached as part of this module. And in it, you're going to find two lists. One is a very short list of artists working in a variety of two-dimensional media. And then there's another page with a big old giant list of a whole lot of artists from the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s. That document is actually coming from the last time I taught painting, where I was trying to introduce students to contemporary painters because they hadn't had a chance to get that far in their art history classes yet. And so we made up a big giant list. And then I asked them to supplement it by naming artists from the same time period that they were interested in, some of whom are not painters, but it's still pretty painting heavy because that's where that list came from. If you are not interested in painting, then you can look at the shorter list on the actual assignment sheet, or you can come up with your own artist. But what we're going to be doing is asking you to find a contemporary artist that you think does interesting things with composition, specifically with emphasis and focal point. You're going to find two images by that contemporary artist, and you're going to do two diagrams on each of those two images. We'll talk more about the specifics of doing that in just a minute. But first, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about contemporary art. What is contemporary art? Well, that's squishy, because it isn't just art by somebody who's still alive, but is also going to be art that engages contemporary discourse, things that are happening in the current art world. You guys are actually very fortunate in the sense that you have Instagram and therefore access to a huge number of contemporary artists, including ones that I might not have never heard of. And that would be wonderful for you to introduce me to interesting artists. However, we want to make sure that we're still engaging with contemporary art instead of just random stuff. And so we need to come up with a definition. The definitions could include things like, if they sell a poster of it at Michael's, it is not contemporary art. Or if it's ever been on a Tool album cover, it is not contemporary art. Or if their name, not their Twitter handle or their Instagram handle, but if their actual name includes a number, it is not contemporary art. These are actually pretty good rules, but we're going to be a little more lax than that. And we're simply going to say that contemporary art is art that it was made after 1968 that is engaged with contemporary artistic trends. Basically, does flippin' like it. And then we know whether or not it's contemporary art. So the guy who chose this work, and you can tell it's a guy, did several things wrong. One, he didn't tell me who the artist was. As it turns out, I know that this is Edward Hopper, but also that means that two, he's not actually doing contemporary art because Edward Hopper made this image in 1944. This is not contemporary because it was made in 1944, and that's even older than me. What we're going to do is also look at what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is to define where you think the focal point is. You're going to draw a big circle on it, and then you're going to label it with a 1. So we're saying that the focal point in this case is the head of the figure. And then you're going to use the same size but smaller circles to define for me any of the secondary areas of interest that you find within the composition, which are going to be smaller circles. So those are our accents. We're going to have a big circle on the focal point, small circle on the accents. And then what we're going to do is extend a line, ideally a solid line coming out of the focal point, and then dashed lines coming out of all of the accents to indicate how the artist is dividing up the space. Because one of the things that's interesting about composition is the way in which artists will intuitively or by planning it create sort of proportional relationships between how they're distributing the accents and the focal points across the picture plane. What does that mean in English? That means, hey, isn't it neat that the distance here to here is roughly double the distance from here to here? And we can see that this shape right here is actually fairly similar to this shape, and we're dividing up the composition into kind of even, clean, proportional elements. It is important to acknowledge there is some subjectivity to whether or not you agree about where things are in terms of focal points and accents. It might be easier to see when we move to the second part of this particular one, because what we're going to do first is the crosshairs thing that we just looked at, and then the second thing you're going to do is, using those same focal points and accents, you're going to map for me how you move through the image. And that's where it's pretty clear that the guy, and we know it was a guy, who chose this not contemporary image was clearly smoking crack and should really stop. Because I actually agree that the head is the focal point, but then everything goes off the rails, because while there is a certain amount of subjectivity to how I'm going to interact with focal points and accents, dude here is high. Look at this. He says that he looks at the head, then he goes out the back of the head and just starts wandering around the wall, and then goes, ooh, boobies, and runs over to the boobies. Then she has laser cannons coming out of her breasts that shoot us over into the Peeping Tom hotel window. I don't know. Ugh. And then we go flying out the top, and eventually we get distracted like a moth by the bright light over here. I disagree. I would say that I would call this a focal point, and then actually I would follow her gaze out here and probably have my next accent be somewhere up in the larger portion of the window. I'm going to slide down here, and then I actually start to swing this way, and I might make it over to the pillow. I might get distracted by something else on the way. It's hard to say because they're so close to each other, and I might stop at the pillow and just rest. I probably wouldn't call this an accent. I can understand somebody who does, but I also don't understand somebody who's going flying out the back of their head. So probably we're going to not use this as an example of a good student diagram, and instead we're going to switch to somebody who diagrammed this, an actual contemporary image by a painter named Inka Isenhai. The title of the piece is Lower East Side. It was made in 2009, and therefore we can tell that it is at least chronologically contemporary. What we see is, they missed the dashed lines, but at least we have the big focal point, and I agree. I look at the big hot pink thing in the middle, and then I do drift up to the brighter light. I definitely, we can maybe see it a little more clearly where we don't have the lines. I definitely am concerned about what's going on with the ghost of Jimi Hendrix coming out of the cellar. I follow the implied line of all of this trash and waste to either the bag, or I actually go up to her head. And here's one thing where I do disagree with this student, because I would complete the circuit and go up and try to figure out why there was a gremlin up on the fire escape. But that's just me, apparently. What we're trying to do with this assignment is, you're going to take, probably in Photoshop, you could do it on tracing paper with photocopies if you'd rather, 2 images by a contemporary artist. So here we have one image, and then you're going to diagram it 2 times. Once to show the way in which we are dividing up the picture plane. Notice the way in which we have certain proportional relationships that make sense across the entirety of the picture plane, and then a second diagram where you're showing me how you move and what elements within the composition, the trail of paper, the curving edge of the roof, whatever it is that's going to help you as a viewer get from one thing to the next. So we're going to have a total of 4 diagrams. You're going to take one image and you're going to do 2 diagrams, and then you're going to take another image and do the same thing. You want to let me know who the artist is,